Okay, Dan, you're ready to go. Let's begin.
Great. Hi, everybody. Hope you can see me and hear me okay. It's miraculous how virtual video works. It's the idea is that you're supposed to be able to feel, we're supposed to be able to feel each other and really have the true energy of presence. It's a way of becoming a shareable wave. So, as many of you know, my name is Dan Winter, and there's some of our websites on the screen. You'll see the screen view there in a minute, the first slide. We have goldenmean.info and fractalfield.com, and with Roger, breakthrough-technologies.com, theimploder.com, heartspring.com. We have many projects, and a lot of them are related to the central theme of this evening, which is, as you can see on our screen, golden ratio, perfected fractal phase conjugation, being the electric cause and mechanism of centripetal self-organizing forces. And we use the word negentropy. You know, entropy means going toward disorder, so negentropy means going toward order. So essentially, our question is to understand the relationship of golden ratio and fractality to self-organization and negentropy as the essence of healing and life force, as well as even the very nature of gravity and perception. You know that perception, we'll see, is measurably negentropic centripetal. Perception, focused attention, causes electric fields to compress. Also, we may get to a bit of discussion about the nature of bliss and enlightenment, how the charge density and charge attraction and centripetal forces are generated. And it's also at the origin of alphabet and symbol and color. So these are big claims. These are extraordinary claims in physics, actually, and of course require extraordinary proof. And that's where we're going with that. And now on our next slide here, particularly this evening, I would like to make the point that negentropy, self-organization and life force, and vacuum coherence for people is the zero-point solution. In other words, the electric geometry and what I'm going to call the dielectric hygiene, and we're going to talk about what that means, which enables people to attract charge, to achieve immortalizing charge in your aura, an aura that is sustainable through death. The negentropic and centripetal nature of your aura, your plasma, your charge, your ka, your boat to the underworld, that hygiene, which enables you to become a charge attractor, is precisely the same physics which enables charge implosion and capacitive devices like pine cones to be alive, and as we'll see more with Bill Donavan a bit later here, is precisely the same physics which instructs engineers to design zero-point energy devices. So if we really understood, for example, how the human body can be a charge attractor with a high dielectric, essentially implosive, to breathe charge in from the vacuum, to cohere the vacuum, then we understand the very physics to build zero-point energy, quote-unquote free energy, solve the energy crisis. So if we solve the energy crisis with our bodily hygiene, the very physics and science of that teaches us how to solve the energy crisis from an electrical engineering point of view. It's very cool. And so I call this a new and corrected relationship to the vacuum. In other words, when religious people tell you walk with the quality of grace, they're telling you you need to attract charge. And if you understand that deeply from a physics and electrical engineering point of view, they're saying establish a corrected relationship to the vacuum. Now that's going to get very practical in this conversation because we're going to talk about the dielectric value, the dielectric constant of your clothing and your house, organic material, conjugate material, which allows charge to breathe, is the same physics where you build an implosive capacitor is the way you build your clothing and your house. So this begins to give you a deep understanding of how you walk with charge, with twinkle, This discussion is the subject of our latest newsletter, fractalfield.com/negentropic fields. Now, the first basic principle, basic concept I'd like to make here is that we have a published article, Bill Donavan, myself, Dan Winter, and Martin Jones. We have a published article entitled Compressions, the Hydrogen Atom and Phase Conjugation. The article is at fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion. And this is published in the physics literature. It's been published in the General Journal of Science. And what this article says and makes the case is that you knew before that golden ratio was the essence of beauty and had a lot of philosophical meaning and geometric meaning and was traditionally regarded as sacred. But what you may not have known was that the reason why the golden ratio is the essence of beauty and has so much tradition associated with is for a deep and solid reason in wave mechanics, in the wave mechanic physics. Namely, that the golden ratio is the solution to constructive compression, which is to say, if you get a large number of different fields to interfere with each other, if the frequency relationship of those waves is golden mean ratio, it maximizes constructive and not destructive interference. And we have the wave equations there in this article, thanks to Martin Jones and Bill Donavan, to prove that the golden ratio is literally the solution to constructive wave interference, and that's why it's the solution to constructive compression, implosion, and in fact is the essence of phase conjugation. Conjugation of phases just means that a large number of different waves in different phases, if they come together at golden ratio, they can conjugate, which is to say they can converge constructively and implode. So we have some rather fun animations of that. Let's play a little animation now. I know these animations, when I click play, it takes a minute to go up on your screen. And I'm looking on Bill's screen here. I can see how these are some of our cool little animations. And they're playing a bit slow on your screen, but at least they appear to come through. And you can see on the top left what is from the front view two golden spirals is from the side view a caduceus. The point I'm making is that a caduceus is exactly what would be called hermetic and Hermes, but in physics it's literally the essence of the conjugation of phases. And notice on the bottom left that when sine waves converge in golden ratio, it actually looks like a flame within a flame. It literally is a flame. And that's important because we're going to see that that's the very nature of negentropy. So the essential vision that's helpful when you're trying to understand phase conjugation, as we say, is the image of two pine cones kissing noses. And here I'm going to play a little picture of that now. Slide number 74. So whenever I say phase conjugation, suggest that you imagine two pine cones kissing noses. Yeah, I can see now the slide has come up on the screen there. Takes a bit. So you see how when two pine cones converge, and there you have a top view and a side view, you have this geometry that allows the inertia at center to be negentropic and centripetal. Specifically, in the image on the bottom right, which is the pentagonal top-down view of DNA and literally hydrogen and every living protein, that the waves there, as you can see, are converging in golden mean ratio. And every time they do that, they add and multiply constructively and recursively, not just their wavelength, but the wave phase velocity. That means as you proceed down the golden spiral toward the center, the 10 golden spirals, because the phase velocities are adding and multiplying constructively in golden mean ratio, that means the speed of the wave front going down towards center, the speed, the velocity of the wave front, is adding and multiplying constructively by golden ratio. And therefore, the velocity is constructively accelerating. which is to say that this, and only this golden ratio, geometry of perfected compression, turns compression into acceleration because the phase velocities can add and multiply constructively. And one way of looking at the Einstein notion of the very nature of gravity is simply gravity is indistinguishable from acceleration, which is to say that if you produce acceleration, you are producing gravity. So in this geometry, which we now know is the geometry of hydrogen itself, that is a form of compression that produces acceleration towards center. Acceleration towards center is the definition of a centripetal force. Up until now, physics had no definition or wave mechanics or symmetry description of the origin of centripetal forces, like gravity. I mean, physics, although they can describe gravity, they have not said yet why an object falls to the ground. But if you see that picture, which you understand to be the very nature of phase conjugation recursion and golden ratio in atomic structure, you can see how compression becomes acceleration, which means charge in that geometry is accelerated towards center and therefore creates gravity. In other words, the reason objects fall to the ground is golden ratio phase conjugation. And there are many physicists who are now agreeing that fractality, and we're saying optimized by golden ratio, may in fact be the cause of gravity. So here in our next slide, we see that in a pine cone, which this is from the Steiner literature, which is called projective geometry of etheric formative force. We think that Steiner used the term etheric formative force because he really didn't know what capacitive lines of charge were. But if you describe this as capacitive lines of charge around this pine cone, you see that there's a net difference of pressure top to bottom, which means that there's a net voltage difference. Pressure is voltage, electrical pressure is voltage, called tension, and that helps you to see why there's a difference in voltage from the top to the bottom of a pine cone, which is measurable also in a chicken egg. And I'm going to show you that picture now. You take a fresh chicken egg and measure the voltage difference from the top to bottom with a high impedance voltmeter. You will get about 4 to 14 millivolts, meaning that here is a device which is somehow producing a voltage. It's a capacitor. It's a stable attractor for charge. It is producing charge apparently from the vacuum, you could say, from gravity. So this is a cohere the vacuum device, a chicken egg. Now, let's think about this a moment in terms of cohering the vacuum in general. You see, what we want to discover is it may be that the very nature of our ability to cohere the vacuum with our bodies is the solution to how we cohere the vacuum with electric circuits. Now, Bill is going to talk more about this later, but this brings up the concept of what's called a phase conjugate dielectric. Let me bring up that slide. You see the picture on the bottom here. Again, we have the two pine cones kissing noses. Maybe it doesn't come through that well. It's just coming through here now, yes. So phase conjugating dielectric is basically, remember, a dielectric is basically the insulator between the two conductive plates of a capacitor. And if the dielectric is magic, for example, biologic materials often form quote-unquote magic or high dielectric constants, as in orgone materials. And what I learned from Bill is that if the dielectric constant of a capacitor is high enough, it essentially means that that capacitor is a cohere the vacuum zero-point device because it's returning more energy than you're ringing the bell with. You see, you measure a dielectric by hitting a capacitor with a voltage and measuring how efficiently the bell rings. And if the bell rings with more voltage, with more energy than you hit it with, then you're getting energy from somewhere other than the energy you rang the bell with, which is to say from the vacuum. Thinking about that brings to mind the famous Gurdjieff film, Meetings with Remarkable Men, in which The spiritual master is the one who knows how most efficiently to create an echo. And if you can make an echo that lives forever, you see, that you have created a sustainable wave, literally a form of immortality. The other thing we wanted to point out about this basic introduction to geometry, in terms of, again, making the perfect echo, is what is the perfect distribution of charge? On the top chart here, you see that if you interfere a large number of waves in golden mean ratio, this top white center bar, the net resultant available power is highest. Whereas if you interfere a large number of waves in powers of 2 in an octave, which is this line right here on the right, you have net destructive wave interference, which is to say loss of power. In other words, putting it very simply, you can actually model this mathematically and prove that golden ratio is maximum constructive interference, and further, octave powers of 2 are maximum destructive interference. Now what this means is that geometries which use golden ratio, like pentagrams and dodecahedron, produce maximum charge distribution, whereas geometries that use powers of 2, like tetra, octa, and cube, produce maximum destructive wave interference, which is not to say it's evil, but which is to say that's a charged isolating phenomenon. So I want to just, this is, we're going to test our little camera here. I'm seeing this on Bill's computer, see how this is going to work here. Yes, this is fun. This is what we call our Star Mother kit. I don't know how well you can see this, but this is there's a dodecahedron inside, icosa, and a dodecahedron outside. So dodeca, icosa, dodeca. This is literally a three-dimensional fractal. And I wrote the new equation to prove that this is functionally the radii of hydrogen. But in that geometry, you get maximum charge distribution. And that's the outer geometry of things like gold powder and the noble gases and DNA, which are charge distribution. Whereas inside, you have the tetraocta cube. I don't know if you can see that. I'll bring that up to the camera here. I have a little fun. The octahedron's in red in there. I don't know if that's too much to ask to see it. But the tetraocta cube is in the center of the dodeca. And the tetraocta cube, from a wave mechanic viewpoint, are basically only one symmetry set. And they create maximum destructive interference. And that creates charge isolation. How does this translate into architecture? This means that in your architecture structures, that if you want a room where you're going to have privacy and secrets and isolation, tetraocta cube is very good, powers of 2. But if you want a space in which you can have sharing of ideas, sharing of people, sharing of information, marketing, openness, then you need pent and golden ratio spaces. So this electrically is how Mother Nature uses chemistry even in DNA. Okay, now the next thing I want to talk about is applying this to the nature of time. And there's a reason for that. This is called proof of fractality in time. Let's see if this slide comes up on the screen here. It comes. I can see it coming up on Bill's screen there. That's good. So you see this little caduceus here. Now, it turns out that if you take something called the Planck length and multiply by powers of golden ratio, you get the wavelengths of hydrogen, as I newly proved in our new equation at that link I gave you. But in addition, if you take the Planck time constant, which is the sort of the definition of sacred time for all of physics, and multiply by exact powers of golden ratio, you get this bottom curve in green here, which is, as you can see, almost exactly 7.83, the Schumann resonance, and the actual other frequencies, which are known to be the Schumann resonance harmonics, 14.3 and 20.8, are very close to that exact curve of powers of golden ratio times Planck time. Now, this even gets more rich when we look at the nature of photosynthesis. Here, I'm just changing the screen here. There it comes. So now I put a new image up here. I'm waiting for it to, yeah, there it is. It's good. So it turns out that if you do a graph of the energy of photosynthesis, actually, there are only two frequencies here. You see it's purple and orange, which motorize photosynthesis, whereas green actually prevents photosynthesis. That's why every living plant spits out the green. You see the green because that's what the plant can't eat. What the plant is eating is the light from the purple and the orange. It turns out the actual peak frequencies that the plant is eating in photosynthesis are 427 nanometer and 691 nanometer. And it turns out that's exactly, again, Planck time multiplied by exact multiple of golden ratio. Golden ratio of the 136 and 137th power. To me, this is one of the most exciting graphics that biology has ever discovered because, and I have to say humbly, I discovered this with the help of Case, actually. But this proves to me why photosynthesis is negentropic, which is to say centripetal. Because in order to have a centripetal force and therefore self-organizing, photosynthesis had to be phase conjugate. So photosynthesis is phase conjugate by golden ratio to Planck because photosynthesis is negentropic and centripetal, which is to say photosynthesis has to do charge distribution. And obviously green is the opposite of that, you know, negative green in psychotronics, etc. Now there's even more to this beautiful story. That if you multiply the same Planck time times golden ratio multiples exactly, you get not just the hydrogen frequencies, hydrogen radii, and the Schumann resonance, but you get almost exactly the duration of the Earth year and the Venus year. So what is this telling us? This is telling us that all rotating systems have to participate in phase conjugation to be centripetal and negentropic. In other words, anything that wants to be alive and mindful has to participate in the geometry of phase conjugation to be negentropic, centripetal, and alive and mindful. This, to me, is the essence of what it means to talk about fractality in time. Now I'm going to move on to one other fun little story here, which is psychokinesis in alphabets. Just, you all know that we've done some work on this. But there's a new little piece of this puzzle. Many of you knew that we had built our equations to show that Hebrew and Sanskrit alphabets. Yeah, this is the sound from the animations here. Just bear with me a second. You can see on the bottom left the Hebrew and Sanskrit. Okay, I'm going to move on now. So on the bottom right now, you see that spiral on the torus. Let's see if it'll animate. It's animating slowly there. It's kind of going. On the bottom right, I have a spiral on the torus. Now, if we just look at this in the camera here I have the spiral on this torus, and you see this is the 7-colored donut, and you know this story that this spiral on this donut, if you just were to look at that spiral from the symmetry views of the tetrahedron, that would be the sequence of the Hebrew alphabet, and you can also derive Sanskrit from that, and you've seen the website on that, goldenmean.info/DNA ring. Well, there's something more to that story which has emerged only recently, which, as we say, the plot thickens. So we knew that basically what these alphabets are doing is they're teaching you to form the toroidal field domain of your optical cortex, of your thought, of your brain, at a certain angle of tilt of a torus. So for example, here in some work that was done on Ophanim Enochian by Vincent Bridges and Darlene, a wonderful work, they show that various, again, strips off the spiral vortex viewed as conical projections were in fact the Ophanim Enochian alphabet. So we have Ophanim, Enochian, Greek in there, you have Hebrew and Sanskrit. It's all about tilting donuts. So what's happening when you tilt these donuts? And we've been studying this lately. And there's a famous ritual. It's sort of like the 4 directions these are called the Enochian calls. And you go to these 4 directions and you pronounce these letters, Aleph, Beit, in a certain sequence from the 4 directions. And then at the center, and we did some amazing work with this in Turin, at the center, you get this effect where if the letters pronounced in the 4 directions are done with discipline, you get an effect at the center where people feel a wind toward center, as if they're blown away in the center, as if there has a spell been cast. And I'm bringing up a graphic here. This is a graphic from the physics of what is the origin of phase conjugation in optics. So if you take lasers and bring them in from four directions, this is called 4-wave mixing. It's one of the first places that negentropy, centripetal force, self-organization, was actually proven in physics, was phase conjugate optics. And it happens when lasers do what this picture is. See the pine cones kissing noses? Well, if you imagine that I'm going to turn this graphic off. If you imagine that your head here, and you're the rabbi, and you're closing your eyes, and you fill your optical cortex with discipline, with 1 Hebrew letter, that causes the magnetic donut of your brain to form at a particular angle. And then you consciously project, and it's like Paul Harris showed how to do this. Maybe if you're there in New York, you could demonstrate, Paul. But you throw that magnetic donut from your brain, and when you do it from the 4 directions, if you've done the letters correctly, this is called a phase conjugate pump wave, creating a centripetal force in the center. And you literally cast a spell. And so you see that the process of becoming sustainable as a plasma being is the process of making your aura centripetal. And the same is true of what makes your aura immortal, what makes your thought immortal, what makes a field effect self-organized. It has to become centripetal. There's one really fun slide we have about this, and this is from Bill's suggestion here. He pointed this out to me. It's the famous paper about phase conjugation in dielectrics. It's called Alice in Barium Titanate Land. It's a play on words from Alice in Wonderland, because barium titanate is a phase conjugate dielectric, and it appears that you make one little phase conjugate field, and on the other side across the room, they will find each other at a distance, appear to self-organize, and know where each other is, and it literally directly imitates how consciousness behaves. In other words, the fields become centripetal, and they begin to self-organize. So we're beginning to get an idea that our ability to reach and conquer the 0-point energy has directly to do with centripetal forces. Now, I want to relate this to origins of bioactive fields. So for bioactive fields, I have this keynote here called the fractal field team. And but there was one more thing I wanted to point out, that this series of frequencies, again, Planck time, exponents golden ratio. Remember what we went through so far? We predicted with that. We predicted the frequencies of hydrogen. We predicted the frequencies of photosynthesis. We predicted the exact duration of the Earth year and Venus year. But guess what? That same equation predicts the exact frequencies Elizabeth Rauscher used to reduce pain with a magnetic harmonic series, which turns out to be the exact set of frequencies that Priory used to heal thousands of cases of cancer with the Priory technology. And oh yeah, Bill is just showing me he has Elizabeth Rauscher's paper right here on that question. Thank you, Bill. That's right. And Roger is helping us now prepare support for the Priory technology. Priory technology used those same exact phase conjugate low frequency magnetics around noble gases, which are a conjugator, and healed thousands of cases of cancer, which the French government even proved. So phase conjugate centripetal fields produce healing because they're negentropic. Same equation applies. And this also relates to what Guy Oblensky is doing up there, and Roger's been introducing people to Guy. It's the same principle. It's a negentropic centripetal, and this is an introduction to bioactive field theory. Oh yes, and there was one more little picture I was supposed to show you about that. Bill helped us over here. We made a new gadget to illustrate the concept of phase conjugate bioactive field magnetics. I'll show a picture here, see how this works out on the screen here. We spent rather months working on this. Bill made the magnet holders in the 3D printer here. It became a whiz in the 3D modeling. Oh yeah, there it is. It finally came up on the screen. So we have, those are 3,000 plus Gauss magnets arranged in a precise dodecacosa, and you put your hand in the middle, as Bill points out, and you feel, it feels cool. It feels cold because it's negentropic, it's centripetal. And even as Schauberger found out, when the vortex, it's a piezoelectric vortex in water, once it spontaneously begins getting colder, that's when you're going to get voltage from gravity in the vortex of water, piezoelectrically doped. And so too, the centripetal implosive phase conjugate magnetics. And the phase conjugate magnetics are what we're using in some of our bioactive field theory. Many of you are familiar with our imploder technology. Just show you a couple pictures. You know that the imploder.com, we have a powerful negentropic centripetal phase conjugate magnetic in the white tube you see here. And on the right is a phase conjugate implosive perfected vortex nozzle. So you have implosive hydrodynamics, implosive magnetics, and get centripetal effect in the water and dramatic agricultural benefit. Theimploder.com. Check it out. And there was another new graphic for that here. Wait, get my pictures together. One moment. So the major picture, which summarizes the compelling evidence here, it's just coming up on the screen now. Yes, on the top here, this is the vortex nozzle. Let's see if that's going to come up there. We're waiting for it to come up. There it goes. Okay, it's up on Bill's screen anyway. So there's the vortex nozzle. You see how that nozzle fits into the star mother here? That's the vortex cone. Here is golden ratio predicting the radii of hydrogen, the frequencies of photosynthesis, frequencies of the Schumann, the Earth year and the Venus year. And there's one more cool thing. Since Roger was one of the last people to have whiskey with John Michel before he died, and we're going to show this in honor of John Michel from his book City of Revelation. He showed that in his beautiful attempt to prove that the meter was obscene, I mean not sacred, and that the English units of measure were sacred, he showed that the foot here, you see the DC here in feet, is a perfect geometric cascade, square root of 2, square root of 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the foot and the Riemann, the Royal Cubic, Palestinian Cubic, Roman Pace, Megalithic Yard, and one English yard are all precise geometric series, implosive, pure geometry cascade of how to make bioactive fields. And what we newly discovered, actually I discovered, was that Planck length times golden ratio to the 1/64th very whole number power equals 0.9964 feet. In other words, the British foot is phase conjugate. So John Michel was right. And guess what doesn't fit anywhere in this perfect geometry of a conjugate centripetal measuring system? What does not fit is the meter. So John Michel can lie comfortably in his grave that he's right, that conjugate dimensions apply to the sacred history of dimension and do not fit to the obscene meter. Thank you very much. Anyway, so but this is all about embeddability. Yes, and we're going to do a little famous demonstration of embeddability here. Getting this in the camera. I'm watching in Bill's computer so I can see this word. This is called embeddability. Embeddability is not only about Playboy. No, this is a golden ratio donut fitting in a larger donut. Now, when the little donut can fit non-destructively in the bigger donut, that's called embeddability. And that's how you can exist in the mind of God non-destructively. And embeddability is idealized by Golden ratio, obviously. Okay, so as you can see, there's lots of places we can go with this. I wanted to finish on bioactive field theory and then move on to hygiene. So first, bioactive field theory. Bioactive fields is from the notion of, in the Bible, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord. Here we have our little graphic of Shem. Let's see if this comes up. This is a dolmen from our friends in Australia. But I will raise a Shem unto the Lord. The word Shem became scheme and chem and chemistry and alchemy. A Shem actually means a bioactive field generator, mistranslated in the Bible to mean the altar in the church. So an altar in the church is actually transliterated to mean a bioactive field generator. And we now know that from this famous book, it was called, the book is called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. It documented that Stonehenge-like structures, and the graphic is just coming up on your screen there, give it a minute. Stonehenge-like structures create a dramatic agricultural growth benefit. And they say that this was actually how you saved civilization, was by knowing how to build a Shem, a bioactive field generator, which is precisely the Hermes hermetic skill. And further, we suspect that this also allowed shamanic initiation and enabled successful birth and death. So obviously, you're not in electrical engineering worth your salt unless you know how to build a bioactive field, because you cannot save your civilization. So we build bioactive fields here. That's what we do. So here's an example of a bioactive field generator. I just bring that up on the screen, and I'm going to show this little thing here. See if this works. So this is a crude example of a conjugating dielectric. In here, I have a gold coating in a trace mineral dielectric ceramic made at Severs. And on the screen here, the slide, you see we actually install in them some ceramic wafers that have been triggered during growth with a phase conjugate piezoelectric speaker array, making a conjugate frequency signature, which is implosive. And these things are so powerful that you place these zero power input required capacitors on the side of this, and here's the graphic coming up on your screen now, hopefully. You see there's a jar on the right here. It should be coming up. There it goes. It's up. So there, I have two of these capacitive devices on the side of this container, and I measure the fermentation rate very accurately inside there with and without those capacitors applied. And this we did many times in acknowledgement of Sal Giandonoto here, who was very helpful. And we saw that repeatedly, at least 30 to 40% acceleration in fermentation rate. So we were able to accelerate growth dramatically with the right kind of phase conjugate capacitance. And this is then how we accelerate the charge density here in these rock powders. Another slide coming up on your screen. This is a rock powder placed in what we call the purify. And sorry about this, the slide always comes up after I start talking about it, but this is the rock powder inside an implosive charge device called purify. And then this rock powder, you spray that in a pond and the dirt precipitates out, or you put it in the soil and the plants grow faster. Plucker, Plocher.de, they're famous for saving lakes and agriculture in Germany using charged rock powder. So this is called the purify technology. It's an example of a bioactive field, which is a negentropic centripetal field in the same way that the Ark of the Covenant was. The Ark of the Covenant was designed to contain radioactive materials and make a centripetal negentropic field. So these are examples of phase conjugating dielectrics and bioactive field theory. So you can make a bioactive field magnetically, optically, dielectrically, as long as you phase conjugate. Another example of this is the famous shungite material. And Dr. Korotkov, my buddy, has a complete website on the shungite material there. You see the graphic just coming up on your screen now. It's shungite.korotkov.org, which is, again, a phase conjugating dielectric, which is bioactive and has all kinds of healing properties. So we are asking you to consider that our civilization needs to be built upon a concept of how waves emerge from chaos. And to emerge from chaos, waves have to be negentropic and centripetal. Some examples. We know that Gaia appears to be self-regulating. of lately, maybe not quite so much so. But the hypothesis here, we know that the Earth's magnetic and energy grid is dodecahedral. What we now know is that we actually know the frequencies to install a pump wave to make the Earth's field more negentropic, more self-organizing. Similar to the way we know the harmonics come out of your heart and brain during bliss and euphoria, they create a phase conjugate pump wave that causes your DNA to break implosively, become negentropic, implosive, centripetal, and ensouled. So there's all of this information about the exact frequencies to make living wave systems more negentropic, more centripetal, which is the definition of healing, the definition of how to create the capacitive field for successful birth and death and plasma projection, the Ka of the Merkaba and all that good stuff. So obviously this has led us to some very wonderful technologies for zero-point energy, and Bill's going to go into them. We have over 13 of these with projects in many countries, New Zealand, Brazil, Australia, with the help of Roger and others. Beautiful breakthrough technology projects underway with an amazing team of physicists and scientists, many of whom Bill coordinates in daily conversations. I want to conclude here with, as Roger emphasized, something practical. And that is the hygiene. What have we learned about hygiene? We're saying that your aura gets large and coherent and therefore immortal when it's negentropic and centripetal. And if you're ever having an argument with your teenage children about not doing recreational drugs, for example, it's no longer necessary to speculate on whether your aura was getting holes in it from the wrong psychoactive materials. No, you take the GDV and you measure your aura. Here, the slide is just coming up. There's the GDV, and here is where you extrapolate that to the whole aura of your body. Here, you have a person. Yes, in this next slide, just came up there. This person on the bottom center has been sitting in front of the old-fashioned CRT computer screen too long, and there's a hole in their aura right here where it got burnt by the old CRT screen. The point is that you can actually measure when you have a coherent aura or you do not. And the word Ka is in Merkaba and Catholic and Cathar. Ka is your boat into the underworld in Egypt, and that is your boat into the underworld, the coherence of your aura. So in my view, the Pope is a Catholic only if his aura is coherent and must be measured to find out. I would like to add that we're now becoming distributors. We were just with Dr. Karatkov in South Italy last week, and he will be teaching here in France with us shortly. And his new, much less expensive GDV system, bio-well.eu, very exciting. It just became economic. It's gorgeous, so you can be empowered. And here, the same device called a Sputnik. Here we're measuring, this slide should be just coming up there. We're measuring the capacitance of the air, which is to say charge distribution efficiency in the air. On the bottom left is a metal building. Bad news, because it's not a fractal capacitor. And the bottom right, you're in a stone circle or a tree circle, and the charge distribution of that air is extremely efficient. And this was where how Karatkov measured sacred space, where the Kogi could make phone calls to their ancestors. Sacred space is simply air where a spark has someplace to go, which is to say charge distribution efficiency defines the sacred and defines the immortal. It defines your aura that it's someplace to go. It even defines where is the place to be born and to die successfully. So last thought. You know, recently that David Wolf published dramatic evidence that there's a wonderful change in your blood chemistry when you get access to ground, which is to say barefoot in the mud, barefoot on the stones. Uh, you instead of walking with thick insulated shoes on sidewalks in the city with metal rebar in them, so you absolutely never get in touch with ground, and then you go to the high stories of your building and your body is in electromagnetic shock, disconnected, you're literally ungrounded in the psychological as well as the physical electrical meaning. If instead of that you take off those nasty thick-soled shoes and you put on your thin leather sandals or even barefoot, and then you're in the dirt and the mud and the sand and the solid stone, and you get directly in touch with ground, there's a dramatic change in your blood chemistry, much healthier. Well, the reason is, of course, access to ground is access to a fractal, which is, say, access to charge distribution efficiency, which means your body can get in phase with and therefore embedded in and therefore phase locked to and distributed to the inertia of nature. And that allows you to implode and attract charge, and that's the beginning of the hygiene to become a charge attractor, which is part of, for example, how people are taught to live without food, etc. It's the ability to attract charge from the environment, the work of Jas Maheen and others. And a final thought about that is, if you really understood what we meant by, if a dielectric is high enough, you're getting energy from the vacuum. You are a zero-point device if your dielectric is really high, dielectric constant, which means your ability to ring efficiently electrically. Well, let me give you an example. When Phil Callahan measured whether trees were going to live or die, he put a capacitor under the tree and measured whether the harmonic series of the Schumann resonance was present or absent. If the tree is harmonically inclusive, it's alive. If it's harmonically exclusive, it's dead. Just like everything in the universe, harmonic inclusiveness defines vitality. The capacitor transducer that he used was living, unbleached hemp fabric, dipped in living seawater or living human sweat and dried in the sun. It was a fabulous biologic capacitor. And that capacitor is the kind of clothing that allows your aura in a high dielectric to breathe and attract charge. And that also defines then, when your building is made of living biologic materials, then the building around you can attract charge. So this is the physics of why we say your building should not be made of metal, but it should be rather made of living biologic materials. Now we know exactly how to measure exactly what defines the best kind of material for a building, because it's literally the dielectric constant, which is literally the efficiency with which it can actually implode and ring and absorb charge. So this becomes a whole science then of, you need to live in charged air and in charged clothing and a charged building. The discipline of your breathing. It's all about accreting, imploding, and attracting charge. So it becomes a very practical set of hygiene instructions for developing a proper relationship to the vacuum. And that's really where we want to go with this. We want to say that, all of us have been running around saying, we really need 0-point energy, and yes, we're going to call it free energy. And I've been always saying, well, maybe you shouldn't quite call it free. No, it is available in the vacuum, and there's lots of energy in the vacuum, as everyone agrees. But calling it free is a little bit irresponsible, because in fact, when you cohere a lot of energy from the vacuum, you can mess with the gravity field and do all kinds of tricky stuff. It's not really free. It's, in fact, 0-point energy. That's a good term for it, and it is to cohere the vacuum. But maybe we are not entitled to cohere the vacuum and have quote-unquote free energy until we understand and take to heart the hygiene for ourselves of how to attract this energy in our own lives, which is this bliss process we talk about so much. Final thought here. We had developed for years this technology of brainwave biofeedback. Bring up another slide here now, where we showed that golden ratio in EEG, in brain waves, correlated to peak perception, even bliss. However, I learned one more thing about that from Bill here, who's about to speak now. And Bill and I were discussing this one day, and we realized that, just play this little animation first here. Here's the animation. So this is a brain wave animation just coming up on your screen now here, showing that the alpha to beta ratio in your EEG, the alpha, beta, delta harmonic cascade in your brain waves. This is a lady having an intense bliss experience. Let's see how this works on the end. Yeah, it's coming up there. It's a little slow, but it's getting there. So during this intense bliss experience, this lady had 3, 4, 5 harmonics, perfect golden ratio cascade, alpha, beta, delta in her brainwaves, right? So she's phase conjugating, she's imploding, and she's having bliss. She's attracting lots of charge, and that same harmonic frequency series is actually measurably causing her DNA to braid, implode recursively. Glenn Ryan did that measurement. So that we knew that years ago, but something we learned recently was that the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere need to be 180 degrees out of phase so that you can make a longitudinal wave. Bill will probably talk more about this, but a longitudinal wave, see, this is a transverse wave. Let's see, transverse wave is like this, up and down like that. That's transverse. Where a longitudinal wave is a compressional wave that goes through like this, where it's a, let's see if I can handle this correctly. So that's right, this compression goes through here like this. Like a sound wave is a compression wave propagating along the slinky. Well, when the brain makes compressional wave, you can create fusion, you create centripetal force. You literally create flame in the mind, just like Ingo Swann was able to light a flame to heat a thermistor at a distance with his mind, which is literally this flame in the mind business. And how the longitudinal, how the transverse is converted to a longitudinal in your brain is actually the instruction for how you feel that beautiful compression implosion. That's the very nature of Kundalini and bliss process. And there's lots about that in our articles on Kundalini. And finally, the actual audio feedback software to allow you to actually play that precise binaural beat. We have made available for free now to the public the actual software. You see, I'm just bringing this up here. We took our biofeedback software for EKG and heart rate variability and breath, and made it very inexpensive for the iPhone, iPad at heartsring.com. At heartsring.com for just $19, you actually can measure your heart rate variability. It measures your pulse and displays the harmonics of your heart and displays heart coherence. And with multiple people, you can measure when multiple people link hearts and line up and measure empathy and teach empathy. And you get a breathing cue where you can move the key signature of your heart and HRV so that people can link hearts and choose empathy intelligently by choice and actually do empathy training. And in the process, you get the musical key signature of your own heart for your rave or bliss band or your guru or your rock star. And then you can take that key signature and you can put it into this new software we're providing free. And that's the next screen here. This is all at this main article for this lecture, fractalfield.com/negentropic fields. And the software is called Secret Sound. Acknowledgement to Mark Crooks here. And it will generate the exact binaural beat harmonic cascade based on pure phase conjugation and play it at 180 degrees out of phase in your headphones, in your ear, and you can feel this implosive binaural beat longitudinal generation in your own brain. It's very powerful. Use it carefully. We're making it available. Right there's the download. It's all there at the website. Kind of fun. You can have the longitudinal. You can make the flame in your mind. You know, I was there when Dahani Wahu initiated the Cherokee shaman if they could make a flame in their mind. And the Bonpo, make the bonfire, same way. It's all very cool. All right. Well, that was just about an hour there. Maybe now we're ready for questions. There's lots to say. There's more time to have fun later with Bill. But if anybody has some questions right now, did you say that would be good, Inga?
Sure. So far, I have no questions, but if anybody has questions, please either raise your hand or type them in. And
maybe I went too fast.
You do get a little excited.
Get carried away. Well, enthusiasm, there it is.
Okay, I think we have a question from New York City. I'm going to unmute Roger so he can get somebody to ask the question.
Great.
Hi, Roger.
Hi, Inga. It's Paul here.
Oh,
Just
hi.
Dan, if you could, yeah, can you repeat the website there again so we can write that down?
The website that had the binaural beat software generator for the perfect longitudinal wave brainwave frequencies is and which was the main website for this lecture, fractalfield.com/negentropic fields. And I will put up the keynote slide that has that website on it right here. One moment. That was the first slide we started with here. So you can see the spelling of negentropic fields. There we go. And that should come up on your screen now in a second here.
And perhaps briefly, Dan, if you could discuss what's happening when you reverse the phases in the brain through the audio waves, and you said we should be use a little bit of caution there. If you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, when the lasers meet each other from opposite directions, like two pine cones learn to kiss noses to phase conjugate in optics and become negentropic, the phase relationship is critical. So classically, the two sets of waves coming from opposite directions in the brain, converging at the pineal, we know that the right and left hemisphere are both making a golden ratio harmonic cascade, alpha beta frequency cascade. But now with Bill's suggestion here, we believe that in fact the right and left hemisphere need to be 180 degrees out of phase. So what emerges at the center point where the two pine cones are kissing noses in the pineal is actually a longitudinal, which is a compressional wave which you can project and actually control heat at a distance. And indeed, so I believe the right and left hemisphere would be 180 out of phase. And that phase relationship is something you can set in that secret sound audio wave generating software. It's very powerful binaural beat software. And like any binaural beat software, even I can tell you a story here. When I first discovered golden ratio in EKG and later in EEG, at that time, Ed Wilson was the research director at Monroe Institute just before he died, very famous. And he decided to drive to my farm to explore that because he was so excited about looking at golden ratio in EEG. And he brought the binaural beat software he had with him. When he discovered that golden ratio in binaural beat software caused people to literally project through the top of their heads and literally, become projective geometry, it was dangerous in the sense that people were thrown out of their body a bit. Maybe they weren't ready for that. And in fact, my wonderful friend and partner Russell Wright tried some of Ed Wilson's golden ratio binaural beat software and found himself projected and a bit disoriented. So I'm saying this is something you play with very carefully. What would help, of course, is now you can do that actually at the key signature of your own body if you choose to link it to the heart's ring. But again, if you want to avoid becoming spaced out, take this very gently, because you see the golden ratio cascade is literally imploding you out through the top of your head, which is something you might wish to do at the time of death. But until then, until you've learned to lucid dream well, etc., you start this very gently, I would suggest.
Thank you. We've got another question here, Inga, from New York.
Go ahead.
Hello, Dan. Hello, Dan. I would like to please you talk about the shape of the spaces that can create kind of sharing space, and the opposite one, which is more closed spaces or more kind of private or intimacy spaces. You were talking about the pentadodecahedron in one case, and the other was, can you please repeat that part?
Yes, it reminds me of when I visited my old friend Gus Ciccacci, who personally introduced me to Bucky Fuller. Gus built a house in Vermont which was the shape of one codon of DNA, and it's a hex next to a pent, and next to a golden rectangle. That's what the DNA ladder rung codon is. And in the hex part of the house, you see, that's where you have privacy. The tetra-octa cube, from a wave mechanic viewpoint, is all one symmetry. It creates all powers of 2, which is charge isolating. So those structures would contain charge and be very good for privacy. Whereas the pent dodeca structures, multiples of 72 degrees, would create charge distribution, and that's where you have sharing and openness. Another good example of that, as Michael Rice is finding so much now, is that a sphere is actually a bit of a charge isolator architecturally and biologically. Biology uses very few spheres, except maybe your eyes. Whereas the egg shape is beautiful. It's charge projective. It's rebirthing. It's, you know, it has that differential. It's the ovoid, you know. So the egg shape is beautiful for that charge distribution. Whereas a sphere is actually dangerous architecturally. I mean, I have had friends literally go nuts inside some perfectly spherical structures. It's a bit dangerous because it's a charge isolator. So those are some examples.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Roger, do you have other questions on your end?
No, not yet. I think we can go on to Bill now. Are you around, Dan, after Bill, or are you signed?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah,
I'll
no, we're okay here, Inga. We'll hand it over to Bill Donovan.
We have a question here from a webinar participant, actually.
Okay.
So I guess one more question for you, Dan, and then we move on to Bill.
Fine. Okay.
All right. So the question is, can you explain a little more what the vortex nozzle does to the water?
Yes. What we did with the design of the nozzle is we took the equation for the perfect nozzle. So first, here's a graphic of the equation. We call this Schauberger's dream. On the top right here, let's see, the graphic is just coming up, that the actual conic angle that I proved were the radii of hydrogen produce a precise geometry of spiral. So that's the conic angle from the caduceus, and then the bottom right you see the red spiral. That I actually took that exact equation and I enacted that in injection molding. The idea is water wants to be centripetal because it has to get centripetal in order to self-organize, which is to say, to cancel destructive wave interference. And so we then built that into a nozzle geometry, which is here. This is a transparent view of the nozzle. Let's see if that comes up on the screen there. We have this in a clear plastic in the shower, and then we have it in stronger Fortron black for the triploid or superploid for commercial use. But you see that's a very precise trajectory for the water. I mean, ideally, a vortex, when it's perfect, will be implosive. It will spontaneously get colder, and at the center, all waves in destructive interference will be self-canceled, and only constructive wave interference will survive. Let's see if the little animation. Now I have an animation here. This is where we get sexy about this. See, yeah. Oh, see, isn't that cool? I've even got the animation working. I could be a pro or something. So that's the actual precise conic angle we use. It's based on the hydrogen geometry to implode the water. And then finally, one more little animation. In the shower, one of our favorite toys here, here's the vortex coming out of the transparent, translucent shower nozzle. You can actually see here let's see if you're going to be able to see that. When you touch the water, so when you touch the water coming out of that nozzle, it's actually self-organizing, and it responds to touch because the pressure waves go right back to the source. The net result, of course, is it's silky and implosive. And then we take that highly spun molecular array and we put it into the highly centripetal magnetic. And what that does, it results in a dramatic reduction in molecular cluster size, producing a dramatic solubility benefit. And that's where we get these things like this 300% growth effect sometimes, dramatic growth effect. It's a solubility effect, which is healthy for every living thing. It feels silky. It's cool. Check it out, theimploder.com. Lots of research there. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I don't have any more questions at this time. So let's move on to William Donavan. So Bill, I'm going to change the presenter right now. So please turn off your webcam and hide your screen. And I'm going to make Bill the presenter.
You can just leave it on. Just click OK. Just click OK. Just come.
You're looking at my chaos. I call it the graveyard.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I need to turn this on. There we go. Put that on the side. Yeah, I see. Okay.
Okay, Bill, can you expand your screen a little bit so that we can see it in more full screen mode? Just stretch it a little bit. Just drag the screen.
Bill is going to share history of 0-point energy devices. So I'll go to the slideshow. Okay. So
okay, here's Bill. Anyway. Hi, Bill.
So anyway, what I'm going to talk about, and by free energy, the definition of this is just energy which is environmentally available as free. For example, wind is considered free energy. Any other environmental source of energy that can be collected, and of course this includes 0-point energy, other than conventional sources. There have been in history, there have been, in legend rather, there have been legends of, for example, the Atlantean fire crystals. Now Paul Moss had different.
Bill, one second.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Can you make sure that you are showing your screen?
Sure. Sure.
It's a little icon that you need to click there. So you're not showing it right now, so click on it again.
Okay. Yeah, that's not working.
It just needs a few seconds to refresh. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I see it showing up in Dan's. All right.
Yeah, so it's on now.
Okay. So Paul Moss had a great presentation a few years back on ancient symbols, ancient power symbols being ancient power symbols. And these symbols essentially meant that, for example, there was one tapestry I had on my wall, and he went past it and said, well, wait a minute, I mean, why do you have turbines in your tapestry? And I looked at it, and sure enough, there was a schematic representation of a turbine in there. So the point being, of course, that free energy has always been with us through ancient times. And what we're going to do in this talk is to take a look at a bit of the history. And after that, we're going to go into the actual technology. And these are technologies that we have been taking a look at and investigating. And I personally network with a lot of inventors all over the world. So we have quite a network going on between, oh geez, just about every continent on the planet. So without further ado, let's just kind of dive into this one. So, Middle Ages,
we had the legend of ancient times of Atlantean fire crystals. Now, this is interesting because most recently there have been crystal power cells, and these crystal power cells are real, and they produce energy from the vacuum, not in a substantial way at the moment, in the milliwatt and watt level, but they are still there. And I think this is linking up to the legends. We have unbalanced gravity wheels in the 11th century. Again, this is a source of energy, mechanical energy, slowly turning unbalanced wheels, permanently unbalanced, with an ingenious clockwork setup in these. Cold fusion in the Middle Ages. I think that a lot of our transmutation reactions that we've been talking about, alchemic transmutation, is actually real cold fusion that they were doing at that time. And alchemy or cold fusion? Well, many alchemic reactions can produce cold fusion, and the evidence of this is that some alchemic reactions actually do set off gamma ray detectors, so it's a real technology. And we also get into phonon resonance with this. Phonon resonance is a longitudinal wave interacting with matter in a very fundamental way. Now, what this means is that a longitudinal wave interacts with the nuclei, and what you do is you tune that wave to the nuclei, and it actually causes the nucleus to rearrange into the preferred order, into that waveform. And this means that nuclear isomers are the easiest to transmute, for example, mercury to gold and a few others. The harder ones are the ones farther away in the periodic table, which actually create exothermic reactions, and so you have to dump the excess heat. And even with the isomers that are close to one another, this also became a problem. Mercury, for example, boils at 600 degrees Fahrenheit, so any kind of exothermic reaction would cause the mercury to flash off. And some alchemists at that time had severe cases of mercury poisoning as a result. So you have to be really careful with this technology. So let's move on. Okay, and to get into the detail of phonon resonance, Joe Champion rediscovered this in the 20th century. This is essentially, again, a type of interaction with both sound and longitudinal EM. So it's that combination of the two that can retune matter into its preferred state. And it uses precise temperature regulation and injection of phonons, longitudinal waves. And Paul Harris, who is part of our group, has been experimenting with this as well. I think it shows great promise. And alchemists talked about the correct key to alchemy, also called the lost chord. There's a story of someone actually drawing a violin bow, and the violin rested on the crucible, and they would just play that chord over and over and over again until they saw color changes occurring in the crucible. So yes, very much so. So this has a lot to do with it. Now, physics tells us that matter is frozen energy. It's a mix of standing wave patterns. So what we're looking at is not so much matter per se, because matter is mostly empty space. And that empty space is composed of these standing waves. So you have to understand that whenever you're tapping into energy, tapping into transmutation effects, that what you're looking at is frozen energy. And most recently, they discovered that when they were trying to capture an electron in orbit, that they had a femtosecond laser and an attosecond, femtosecond, around that that time period. And what they discovered was that they couldn't find the electron in orbit. What they saw was a Beck gradient, Bose-Einstein gradient. And what this means is that they saw this standing wave. They didn't see an electron. It was a standing wave that had not condensed into an electron. Very important stuff. Now, the implication for this is that at that time, that the electron had not collapsed into its quantum state. Now, according to quantum mechanics, the electron is supposed to be in its quantum state very early on, at less than 10 to the negative 42nd of a second or so. This is not the case. More recently, they discovered that matter is in its wave state far, far longer than it should be. And that means that quantum mechanically, the engine that is in operation before it gets turned off and turned into solid matter is still running. So what fraction are we looking at? Well, that means that matter is really in its energy state 90% of its time. Now that means that it's mutable. It can be changed. And whenever it's in its quantum state, when it's frozen out, you can't change it. It's brick-like. It's solid. But that's only what we observe. 90% of the time, it's energy. That's what we don't observe. We only see it in its solid form. Now, today we're calling this LENC, low energy nuclear change, or LENR, low energy nuclear reaction. So let's move on again. Bestler wheel to the 18th century. The Bestler wheel is the same thing as a Frias wheel. It's an unbalanced wheel. John Keeley showed that you can actually create changes down at the nuclear level using sound only. Now, of course, Joe Champion used a combination of temperature only and sound in a very minor way. Keeley used sound primarily, and he didn't even know that there was a key that included temperature, and he was getting changes done with extremely high amplitude sound. And then, of course, we go into the primary genius of the 19th and 20th century, Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla showed that resonance is key, and that matter is composed of resonance systems. So, and this is, he was contemporaneous with other scientists at that time that were showing that matter is actually a resonance system, although it wasn't highly publicized. I mean, we're talking about basically a materialistic-based science that wanted to promote a brick-like behavior to matter, that showed that it's unalterable unless you're looking at really high energies in the realm of the heart of stars at millions of degrees, or in collider systems with millions of electron volts, which is not necessarily the case. There were energy patents in the 19th century that showed that these resonance systems were available and were being used. And Clerk Maxwell, also in the 19th century, had a working unified field theory. And what this meant is that he described matter as a kind of a trapped energy or a locally trapped potential. We'll be getting into that later. Essentially, the old version of matter was that you had electrons whirling around the nucleus. The new version of the atom is that first you have probabilistic events occurring inside of the shell, and an electron shell really is an electron shell. It's a wave that's reflected from the Casimir boundary around it to the nucleus. So that means that you have this standing wave going on. And earlier, they were wondering why the electron didn't collapse into the nucleus, and of course they came up with various mechanisms for doing this. None of them really made a lot of sense, but the standing wave does. Why? It's because in the standing wave model, the negative of the negative vector of the electron standing wave is pointing out, and we see, we're looking at this negative charge, and it looks like the electron, although the electron really can't be caught and observed as an electron unless you catch that wave and stop it. So the new model, of course, is that the electron is a diffuse standing wave between the nucleus and this shell boundary. Then the positive vector of the wave points toward the nucleus. Why is this important? Well, the nucleus is a standing wave structure itself. Its wave, its positive wave, points out. So you have electrostatic repulsion between the two standing wave structures. So it's a cavity resonator. So the whole system is balanced, and compressing the electron shell actually requires energy to do this. It's a beautiful model. So essentially Clerk-Maxwell comes along and he said, well, okay, well, you can model this thing in a wave theory, and the wave theory makes sense. Of course, later on, they tried to make the quantum side fit the wave theory, and things didn't quite fit together. So in the early 20th century, they primarily used the wave theory to describe matter because they knew the equations, and the equations worked. And sometimes the quantum theory worked, sometimes it had exceptions where it didn't work. So they primarily used the wave theory. So the next guy that come along to use resonance systems was Henry Moray. Henry Moray actually had a device that you can see this in the small photograph that we have in the upper middle of the screen, and he was extracting 50,000 watts, 50 kilowatts out of the vacuum, and by resonating with the vacuum, of course. And what was Moray using? Well, Moray was a student of Tesla's technology, also a student of Clerk-Maxwell, so he knew the original equations. Now, this is where things start to get interesting, because usually politics and science are polar opposites. Whenever politics gets involved in science, it usually corrupts it. And when moneyed interests realize that science is not benefiting them, then they step in to corrupt it deliberately. This is what happened in the early 20th century. Oliver Heaviside, who was really a bagman for the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, was paid to rewrite the electromagnetic theory. So he takes Maxwell's electromagnetic theory, which was in quaternions and difficult to calculate, simplifies it incredibly, and they could calculate rings around the quaternionists. But the problem was that when they did this, they basically took this long equation that had 16 different solutions to electromagnetics, and they took the torsion part of it, sawed it off, threw it away. Well, what did that include? Well, that included gravity. That included several other things. Local compression of space-time, local curvature of space-time, things that you could do free energy with. This was deliberate. When they did this, they were in a panic at that time as well. They knew that if they continued to teach the original quaternion theory in universities, that they would have 100 Nikola Teslas out there, because Tesla was one of the people who was schooled in the quaternion mathematics. So they had to corrupt it in order to get us away from gravity technology, from any kind of vacuum resonant technology. So it basically got buried at that time. So moving on again, mid-20th century, National Security Act of 1947. What this effectively did was, this is another move to take anybody who educated themselves in the real science and to confiscate these patents. So there are up to 7,000 patents classified as a result and remain so to this day. Now these are classifications, or these are actions that are retroactive. So what they did was they basically grabbed all the patents before 1947 as well that they considered a threat. Now, this also gets into the story of Nikola Tesla and the famous safe incident where unknown persons, and it was suspected that these were either the FBI or a similar alphabet soup agency, went into the safe and took technologies out of the safe that were related to, they might have called it defense related. It was really more energy related. And of course, then getting into more of the corruption part of this, the governments are discovered to be corporations, and the conflict of interest runs rampant. Again, to understand what happened with energy technology, a lot of scientists try to remain pure and they try to keep politics out of it. But you have to understand where we got to today. It's how there was this commingling of politics and energy, politics and science, and how the two basically turned into this can of worms that corrupted everything. However, we're going to be coming up with a solution to that later on. So 21st century, modern era. These classified inventions are rediscovered. You might kill the inventor, but not the idea. It's the Rupert Sheldrake idea of morphic resonance. Tesla's inventions have been rediscovered over and over again, even the classified ones. People are coming up with it again. It's like these structures are in the ether. They're talking about vacuum resonance. Once you put a thought out, it's out there for anybody to pick up. And of course, the Homeland Security Act has been used to harass inventors, most notably some HHO inventors, so that essentially what this means is that you're basically taking two wires, sticking in a bucket of water, making hydrogen and oxygen gas. But they're going after these guys as well. This shows the desperation that's going on. So was Ayn Rand right? Do we need a Galt's Gulch? And inventors have been talking about this, and we're talking about possibly having some place on the planet that is a safe haven for these technologies to go to. And the other way of doing the suppression is to call these energies related to terrorism, that, oh my gosh, if people had these forms of energy, they make a bomb out of it, or something similar to that. Well, I had a contact that was inside Los Alamos, and he basically came to me and he said, he basically was a defector from Los Alamos. And he said, you know how cold fusion was really being horribly suppressed? I said, well, yeah. Okay, and you understand that whatever they're actively suppressing, they're using in a defense capacity. So, okay, fair enough. And then the realization dawned. I said, oh, wait a minute, wait a minute. I mean, are you saying what I think you're saying? Oh, yeah, yeah. They basically made a cold fusion bomb, and it had a dialable capacity from from a bunker buster up to 10 megatons, and no fissionable material, and then you can go through an airport, and I mean, it doesn't even show up in any of their detectors, and which made the hairs in the back of my neck stand straight up, of course. So, who's the real terrorist? I mean, the people that are actually doing the bomb making, or the people who are trying to push forward these technologies to move our civilization forward into a green technology, get away from dirty energy? Well, I think it's basically the people who are the bomb makers that are in the governments that are the real terrorists. But of course, it's going to be putting me on some lists now. Anyway, let's move forward. Okay, let's get into the technology. So, first one is the trout turbine. What is the trout turbine? This is something that Victor Schauberger made originally, and we have been reworking it. There are different types of trout turbine that can be used. One is a three-dimensional model that's similar to Dan's imploder. In fact, the imploder would probably have quite a sizable torque component to it if you put this thing on a common shaft, which we may be doing later. A two-dimensional vortex, which you can see here on the screen. This one produces a differential torque to it. How it works is these fluidic loops that you see in here actually have a force component to them. And what happens is that when fluid moves through these loops, and we're talking about fluid moving from the arc passages on the outside to the inside, this causes two different fluidic vortexes, one moving clockwise, the other moving counterclockwise. When these are in operation, it will basically produce a differential force component. You can see whenever fluid is moving through these, it essentially creates a force. That's a V cross R, and this is producing the effect. Now, keep in mind that Victor Schauberger also made a version of this thing, which we're calling the herringbone plate. And the herringbone plate is simply a straight version of this thing. I mean, instead of curving it around into a circle, this thing it's linear, and like a linear induction motor. Okay, Clem engine. Now, this is taking the vortex into the third dimension. So essentially what we're doing with this one is, it's a rather complex system. There's several different forces going on here at the same time. I mean, you've got this expansive force and implosive force. You have centrifugal force that's being translated into a linear force component. And then you have some other things going on at the same time. Essentially, this is something that Richard Clem had produced in the 1970s, ran a car off of it. It originally was based on a paving machine using asphalt. Richard Clem did not patent this because he thought that the patent for the original paving machine pump was way too close to it. So as a result, all that we have is this diagram for the paving machine. We know that Clem made several different versions, and he didn't put any documentation down, didn't do any drawings. So all we have are basically anecdotal evidence that his later versions worked and were more effective. And he said it was like a turbine, that it wasn't. That's a clue. Now, this is also related to the Rory Johnson engine. Now, Rory Johnson used cavitation liquid metal with that. And this one is with liquid gallium with deuterium oxide dispersed into it. Deuterium gas was also used in the Roy Johnston engine, which if you use phonon resonance with an implosion system with the Johnson engine, it would produce a huge amount of energy. Now, why would you use gallium? Well, gallium has a high boiling point. It's around 2,000 degrees or so, as opposed to mercury. So if you want something that'll run really hot without boiling off easily, gallium is the way to go. So he made that correct call. So moving forward, we have the Searle effect generator. And the Searle effect generator is using unbalanced magnetic fields. Again, there's a vortex component to this. So the Searle effect generator is very intriguing in that it can be modeled quite easily mathematically. Although John Searle himself never did that math modeling. He had something called the law of squares. And the law of squares really was, it wasn't an engineering way of describing the technology. If you want something that's going to be engineerable, you have to use common terms. You have to use a common mathematical foundation for describing what you're doing. And in order to do this, you can scale up, scale down, and it makes things a lot easier. Without a working theory, without a mathematical model, it makes things quite difficult to do so. The Searle effect generator most recently has been reworked using neodymium iron borate magnets. And he showed that it had a quite impressive, quite a substantial force component to it. As far as throttling goes, there are different methods of doing this using interactive magnetic fields, changing the geometry of the rotor, going from a cylinder to a pine cone technology. This actually creates a flux lensing effect where throttling the device is much easier. Now, one of our colleagues is working with the Schaefer steam generator, and we are also probably going to be building one of these as well. It's using an implosive vortex to do the work. The implosive vortex essentially takes water, it channels it through different passages of increasingly smaller and smaller diameter. At the same time, you're running, again, through phonon resonance, this standing wave structure that's on the inside. And in order to create the correct standing wave structure, you have to understand what the resonant points of hydrogen are. And that's something that Carl Schaefer did intuitively when he designed it. To maximize the effect, since hydrogen has more than one resonant node, we would probably include all these nodes in a more comprehensive design. The one that you see here was designed by Will Green. He's another colleague of ours, and did a great job, and we're looking for someone to build one of these for us. We're also looking for a machine shop. So this uses a combination of two different forces. This is using implosive cavitation as well as phonon resonance, and also it's using this this implosive compression force into the fluid. So now all three forces, of course, are used in the system. Okay, now I mentioned something about the Atlantean fire crystals earlier. In legend, the Atlanteans used crystal technology to obtain power. I think we're getting back into this again. I think that this is the old thing with Schliemann and the Troy legend, that these legends have a basis in reality. And we're getting into that now. We're actually rediscovering things that have been known thousands of years ago. This is Marcus Reed's crystal power cell, and he's another colleague of ours. It produces 10 milliwatts per kilogram, uses a crystalline silicate for a material which we suspect has nano fissures inside of it, and these nano fissures are essentially acting as wave conduits for electrons in their wave state, not in their quantum state. So this is an important point, because if you constrain the electron to its wave state, the electron only has the properties of resistance while it's in its quantum state. In its wave state, it doesn't have any resistance to it. So to maximize the effect, of course, we would need to maximize the thickness, the dimensions of these quantum fissures. And one way of doing that would be to incorporate nanofibers, nanotubules into the mix, which is something that we're going to be experimenting with. This is true vacuum resonance, because there's a high frequency component that has been detected with the crystal power cell. So what this means is that there's an interaction of the device with the vacuum. It's locking into the vacuum, and it's just, I mean, because of its small energy content, it's extracting very, very tiny amounts, which is safe, because the vacuum itself has around 10 to the 94th ergs per cubic centimeter. What does this mean? Well, with that amount of energy coming out of the vacuum, if you tapped all of it, there is more energy in 1 cubic centimeter of the vacuum than every star in the galaxy is putting out. It's astronomical. So tapping tiny amounts is safe. I mean, this is a good thing. We just have to tap just a smaller, rather just a slightly larger fraction than we're getting, and we would be fine. As far as the effects that you would get, whenever you tap large amounts of energy, you produce larger amounts of spatial curvature, and you change the rate of flow of time, which may not be a good thing. I mean, Sparky Sweet discovered that he was getting weight changes and time flow changes locally. So what I would predict is that this technology would probably be used in a decentralized mode. I mean, you don't want 1,000 megawatt power plants using this type of technology, because you're going to wind up with areas of local space-time curvature which may not be desirable. So let's go on to the next one. So there's a guy by the name of Laser Hacker that produced another crystal cell. And his crystal cell has a different set of chemicals. They're all household chemicals, quite easily obtainable. Now, his actually has 126 milliwatts, thereabouts, coming out of his cell. And you can see that in the photograph here. This is made out of a copper pipe cap. So you can see that he has a higher power density than the Marcus cell. Now, this is also quite possibly due to vacuum resonance. He didn't do any, obviously the guy's a hobbyist, and he doesn't have a spectrum analyzer, and we're going to be doing an analysis of this with our spectrum analyzer to see what the components are this is going to be necessary for the next step in doing the reverse engineering of the crystal cell concept. Is this due to corrosion? Well, I think there's a small component that is in the beginning, and as the power drops off, obviously there's more energy in these devices than can be obtained due to corrosion. One way of proving this is to, again, do the mathematical model of these devices, the crystal cells in particular. I predict that what we're going to find out is that there's probably 1 to 2 orders of magnitude, possibly higher, of energy coming out of these devices than can be explained with corrosion. I think the galvanic effect actually produces a bias in the material. And we're going to see how important this is when we come to the electret systems, which I'm going to be covering in just a short while. These devices aren't really at a marketable level yet. They need optimization. The energy densities are between half to a quarter of what you would expect in a typical AAA cell. So they can power motors, they can power small devices, but you would need to increase the efficiency of the system and the effect in order for these to be marketable. This is where the reverse engineering comes in, and it's so important when it comes to this technology. So the granddaddy of all of these is John Hutchinson. And he really did the first one. Now, John has actually made some electret-based cells using different rock powders. And they were very obviously electrets because he polarized them to begin with. Some of his later devices are not polarized. They use the galvanic effect to do self-polarization. Again, I think it would probably optimize the system to actually make a hybrid and do both. So these are a few things that we're going to be experimenting with. I thought I would include the John Hutchinson power cell because it was really fundamental to the whole crystal cell concept and the fact that these things are so simple to build. So next, let's go to the atomic hydrogen process. Now, this was originally discovered by Irving Langmuir in the early 20th century. He was interested in finding a gas to use in incandescent bulbs. Tried several different gases. Inert gases were the best, obviously, and some of those are used. The krypton gas bulbs that you see today are based on that. And he discovered that there was something strange going on with the hydrogen, where it would go into the filament with extremely high packing densities when the filament cooled. When the filament was heated up, you would actually see the filaments cracking, and they would be coming apart because of these tremendous pressures that were generated inside of the filament. And it was when he initially started these lamps up, they would see these huge temperature spikes inside the filament, which we would be calling Le and R today. Now, the other thing is that in dissociating hydrogen from its diatomic to its monoatomic form, we also have other effects, and these are also catalytic nuclear effects going on. These catalytic nuclear effects produce anomalous heating, and that was known to occur in the Langmuir process with atomic hydrogen, which was ignored, by the way, because they really didn't have a theory to explain it, so of course they just ignored it. The claim is over 100,000 calories per mole gram of hydrogen with an input of 1,000 calories. So this means a COP of 100. I mean, this is a huge amount. For example, both Rossi in the Leonardo Corporation and Deucalion have far less than a COP of 100. This is the theoretic maxima going on with the system. This is also something William Line mentioned could be easily attained. Well, no one really has rebuilt the line system, so it's about time for it to happen. So when it does, we're going to be writing this up and probably making that the results of another paper. Now, is this tapping into the vacuum, or is Randall Mills correct that it's using the vacuum as a source of energy? Really, the jury is out on this one, because if it is that the ZPE, ZPR, as Line calls it, ZPR, then if we do our analysis, we're not going to find any deuterium coming out of the system. We're not going to find any other fusion products. It's just going to be straight hydrogen. In that case, then Randall Mills is going to be vindicated in his theory. However, if we do the experiment and we find that deuterium is being evolved, by the way, deuterium can produce 55 megawatts per gram of hydrogen. It's a huge amount of energy. And this is something that has also been seen in the astrophysics community. We do know of different stars out there that convert hydrogen to deuterium, and they actually power their processes using this. And of course, then there's hydrogen to deuterium, there's catalytic systems, and then the really, really hot stars go straight from hydrogen to helium, well, not a catalytic way, but they burn through it so fast that they go supernova rather quickly. Now, also, cold plasmas exhibit some of these anomalies as far as vacuum resonance, but they do not produce heat. They produce other forms of energy, and it can be tapped directly. And this is using of course, the PAGD, pulsed abnormal glow discharge system. It's really, as far as engineering goes, if you need heat, go with the heat. If you need power, go with something that may not necessarily require the conversion from heat to electricity. So there are different avenues of going about this. And the diagram that you see on here is from William Line, of course. Now let's go to George Egley's carbon fusion system. This has a COP of 2.0. Now this is actually doing transmutation. And essentially what Egley does is he takes carbon powder, basically charcoal powder that he gets at a corner gas station, and puts it inside of a microwave oven and zaps it. And what this does is it produces several different effects. There's an evidence of a magnetic form of carbon, which is a type of a fullerene coming from the system. This was initially thought to be iron, which probably is not. Turning the carbon to iron would produce such a vast amount of energy that it would probably melt the microwave oven. Other elements were found, including boron. This is evidence that there is a true transmutation effect going on. These transmutation effects, of course, would probably be about 25 megawatts per gram, unless it's again optimized. But at 25 megawatts per gram, it's still a lot of energy. Now, another thing that needs to be discussed is what Nikola Tesla may have been doing, and with a Pierce Arrow automobile that he had. Now, the Pierce Arrow had carbon rods, We know that Tesla also used open-air X-ray tubes with the carbon. Why is this significant? Well, if you tune the tubes to the nuclei of the carbon, you can cause K-shell collapse. This means that carbon will convert into boron. Now, boron 12 is extremely unstable, so it throws out a free electron, beta emission, technically. The beta which is emitted has up to 1,000 times the energy of the absorbed electron into the nucleus, with a potential COP of 1,000 to 1. Now, this beta emission can be absorbed in a coil that's surrounding the carbon rods for direct conversion of electricity. And the typical conversion rate could be up to around 50 kilowatts to the kilogram, extremely high. If Tesla was doing this, I think we may have a direct correlation between Tesla's Pierce Arrow and Henry Moray's unit that he was using, because Moray was doing some transmutation effects as well. Now, one other significant point that really should be made is that there's a branching fraction for the carbon where there's around 1% of it can actually convert carbon to helium, which produces also a vast amount of energy, and alpha particles which can be captured and used as energy. And I think this was also used in the Pierce Arrow system. So let's move on to some other systems which are using transmutation. This one most notably the Rossi's ECAT nickel fusion system. This has a COP of 6.0. It converts nickel to copper. And a rather convoluted branching system where it ping-pongs back and forth, has a couple of radioactive elements before it finally gets to copper, which is non-radioactive. Again, over 25 megawatts per gram of fuel. Clean energy, it's as long as nickel 59 is avoided. If nickel 58 is used, then it gets a little complicated. But there are ways around that as well. And this gets into the direct transmutation using high temperatures, similar to what he's using right now with the hot cat. I suspect that he knows about this math model, and that's why he's going to these higher temperatures. Again, using the phonon resonance concept, you would be using both the temperature and the phonon resonance as keys. And it's also interesting to note that Rossi's his heating elements look like these caduceus structures that are inside of the core, and I suspect that he's using a longitudinal or torsional wave component inside of these antennae. It very well might be the effect that he knows about these and he's inputting these to get the effect done, and that's probably part of his IP. Oops. But anyway, it's important to understand how this process works. Okay, Defcalian Hyperion reactor. Now this one has a COP of 20. That's what they're claiming. Again, nickel to copper. Same 25 megawatts per gram of fuel. And they are Rossi's competitor. Interesting to note that in their system, they are using atomic hydrogen. They have an arc that dissociates the molecular into atomic hydrogen. Now, if this is the case, then they may be using the atomic hydrogen process as well as the catalytic process to do this higher COP, although they're not as high as the theoretical maxima of 100. So they might be able to get up to that at some point. Okay, so now we're going to get into the more esoteric part of the energy system. Tom Bearden's energy collector. Now with this one, essentially what Tom was mentioning is they use a current-free potential. There are different ways of tapping into this. One method of doing it would be to use two different materials at two different relaxation times, so that you have a battery with one relaxation time and another. By relaxation time, I think I need to elaborate on that one. It takes a finite amount of time for the electrons to start moving after you apply a signal to any material, copper, aluminum, whatever. Each material has a different lag time that it takes for the electrons to actually begin moving in the metal lattice. So you use two different materials. One that has a longer lag time. Your load has a shorter lag time material. So by using two different metals or two different materials, and Bearden calls it a degenerate conductor, you can use that as well with a composite. This means that the current-free potential energizes the collector, which can be a capacitor, and then that gets switched to another a load that you can power things with. So there are different methods of doing this other than using using these two different materials. Obviously, material engineering in this would be rather difficult. Not impossible, but just a little bit on the difficult side. So what's an easier way of doing this? This is it. This should be coming up on your screen right about now. Okay, so this is basically two electrets. The electrets basically have a permanent electric field potential across their dielectric, permanently polarized. The electrets are the electric analog of a permanent magnet. So, and they actually take about as much energy to create. The permanent magnets, you have to juice them up with 100 times the flux density, and you get about 1% residual in the material. Even with supermagnets, you have to have a huge amount of energy dumping into it in order to get these things polarized. Same thing with the electret. If you put in 25,000 volts in an electret, your material would have about 250 volts on it. Typically, they're a lot lower voltage because people don't like to work with much higher voltages because of arcing problems and dielectric breakdown. A lot of electret materials have a low dielectric strength, which means that they tend to break down easily. And so in this one that you see, I'm putting in a 12-volt signal with a 12-volt bias on this thing. Think of the electrets as a kind of a battery. And it's a temporary battery. It's a capacitor. So every time the AC signal goes into the electret, you have 12 volts in, it combines with that 12-volt current-free potential that's in the electret. So now you've got 24 volts coming out of it. What does this mean? Well, that means that you're going to get a COP of 2.0 with this system, which isn't much, really. But remember, when I mentioned that you can actually have electrets that can have much, much higher voltages, up to 250 volts. So in this case, if you had, say, a 12.5 volt signal going in, 250 volts coming out, now you have a COP of 20 instead of 2.0, which is quite significant. This is possible. It would be a bit tricky to do, but not impossible. With the one that I showed in here, this would be quite easy to manage. The higher COPs would produce nonlinear effects, which would make it harder to regulate. All of these systems are highly nonlinear, including the Rossi system. Any alchemic transmutation is also highly nonlinear and difficult to regulate, but tricky. I mean, you want to be careful. Don't do this at home, boys and girls. So anyway, let's move on. Charles Flynn transformer. This one is a power from asymmetric magnetic fields. How this works is you're actually using the permanent magnet as a kind of battery. And magnets are kind of a storage battery in a way for magnetic flux. So Flynn was using this thing as a way of storing the energy. Now, another interesting thing about these neodymium iron borate magnets is that they don't appear to demagnetize very easily. So it's been said that these things are charging up from the vacuum, and that may be the case. And if that is, then they will never demagnetize. If they do demagnetize, I predict that they probably would have a sizable COP associated with that. And in other words, you'd probably be able to magnetize these with far less energy than you're getting out of the extraction system. So this would be another way of getting at the energy, because in these magnetic field systems, any kind of magnetic field does vacuum polarization. I mean, magnetic fields polarize the vacuum, and electric fields polarize the vacuum. So it's a way of getting into this form of energy, a clean energy that doesn't require any kind of fossil fuels. We're not talking about fission. It's much cleaner than what we're using at the moment. Now, the one that you probably see coming up on your screen now is the implosion transformer. The implosion transformer, which we're calling the implosion transformer, was originally Nikola Tesla's 3-coil system. How is this significant? Well, for the longest time, people would just scratch their head wondering why Tesla built this pancake transformer. What is this thing, and what is it good for? Well, it turned out that the pancake was actually a capacitive tape-on core. It was a capacitor. It was a spiral wound capacitor. Normal capacitors are wound so that they're at the end. So they're the currents inside of a capacitor are basically equal and opposite. They're like that. So because of that cross vector component, the B fields cancel out. They're effectively zero. And what this means is that there's no net magnetic field. So I mean, if you just hooked up a regular capacitor to this thing, there's no magnetic field component to it. However, you hook them up to opposite points. I mean, diametrically opposite between the two. So you hook it up inside the hub in one point, and on the outside, the very outer edge of the spiral wound plate. What this does is produces a net magnetic field. This magnetic field can be quite large. If you had 1,000 turns on this thing with 10 amps going into it, you're getting 10,000 Gauss out of it. I mean, a huge magnetic field, which collapses into a primary that's wound in the center of this thing. Okay, so you Tesla buffs, open up your ears. This is how it works. So what you do is you set up, you wind the capacitor to match the inductance of that center. I'm going to put this over here. They see the arrow. Okay, this center coil here, output number 1. You set it up so that it's a resonant system. You hook them up together in parallel in a tank circuit. What does this do? This sets up a resonant tank. The back EMF from your output coil energizes both the input coil and the capacitor pancake coil. The back EMF ping-pongs back and forth in the system. energizing it. Now, as far as a COP, I would have to guess it would be far more than 1.0. Critical part of this is, as it's shown, there's not enough iron mass in here. You would have to increase it substantially, possibly more than a normal transformer, to keep the reluctance down. So that'll give you an assembly tip. Anyway, this thing is probably going to be way over 1.0 for a COP. Be careful with it. It's highly nonlinear. And let me know if any you guys build it. Okay, now let's go to Floyd Sweet, vacuum triode amplifier. What did he do? Well, his material was both a permanent magnet and a dielectric at the same time. Now, when you do this, what happens is that you produce a flux gating system. It becomes also a resonance system in a solid state manner, because you're producing a resonance down at the nuclear level of the ferrite. And this is typically using a barium ferrite type of material. So very interesting system. Sweet was, he was way over 1.0, had around 20 microwatts on the input side. He was getting out typically about 500 watts. As far as, the people say, oh, why don't you just go ahead and build it? That's where things get complicated, because, again, you're inducing a resonance of the nuclei of the material, which produces some instabilities in the material if you're not careful. And some experimenters have had some explosive results with these things. So it gets tricky, and it gets into alchemic transmutation at the same time. So some experimenters have actually taken their magnets out, got them analyzed, and found elements that weren't there to begin with. So that is, it's another device which taps into the nuclear magnetic resonance in the material. Again, very similar to the Tesla carbon rods in his Pierce Arrow, and there are just threads running through all of this. I mean, whenever you start tinkering around with the resonance structures inside of the nucleus, you can extract energy, you can input energy. Inputting energy can give you different elements. Extracting energy gives you a different range of elements. So it's quite an interesting technology. A clean technology if used carefully and correctly. Okay.
Bill, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to quickly interrupt you. We have 10 minutes left, so just a little time check.
Okay, I'll.
We need to leave a few minutes for questions.
Right. So, Robert Alexander patent. Okay, this uses a resonant system, and this is also using two equal and opposite magnetic fields to do the work. You can see that the way this is wound, it's a caduceus. I mean, these are caduceus coils that are wound in the motor itself. What does this do? Well, the caduceus basically eliminates the Lenz law back torque. And the Robert Alexander patent produces a COP of nearly 3.0. We're probably going to be building this here. Okay, why was it banned in the US? Because obviously it is, unofficially of course. According to Al Bielek, this type of generator was used on board the USS Eldridge. It produces gravitational resonance effects locally, produces local distortion of space-time, tampers with the time metric, does all kinds of funny things. So this will give you an idea of what to watch out for if you're working with this technology. So let's move forward again. Okay, we're going to be getting into some of the anti-gravity, which is really interesting stuff. What you see in this is something that I've nicknamed the warp coil. I built this over 20 years ago. This was based on a suggestion from some papers by Victor Schauberger. And this actually will produce a reduction, a weight reduction of between 5 to 20%. This is documented. I mean, this is real. I mean, it was fantastic, but real. I mean, I couldn't believe it when it happened. But yeah, it validated a lot of Victor Schauberger's stuff, because Victor has been slammed a lot for just not doing everything intuitively and not working with mathematics. Well, I did the math modeling in this thing. I have the Excel spreadsheets. It does work. It's provable. It's quantifiable. It's engineerable. Victor Schauberger's stuff is a real phenomenon. Okay. This is the herringbone unit. This is another Schauberger system. Now, if the other one worked, because of all the parasitic drag going on in the other two coils, if that worked, this will be even better. Gets rid of the parasitic drag. What does this remind you of? Remember Victor Schauberger's analogy to the salmon moving upstream. If you've ever seen salmon just kind of hovering in midair, flapping their tails, why are they doing that? It's because they're pumping the fluid through these vascular systems that are propelling them upwards. Again, quantifiable and very engineerable. We know why it does it. We know why the bumblebee flies, because they have the same vascular system inside of their carapace. This also relates to Viktor Grebennikov and his system. Let's move on. How do we work with this? Okay, so this is a possible application with the Star Trek buffs can probably recognize the one on the right-hand side. So these would be with outrigger nacelles. This is another system. Now, this is, let's see, this Dan showed you this system using the smoke ring concept with the torus, and a lot of discussion has been made with the community with Foster Gamble, and they're talking about torus systems. This is a fluid torus, and it uses fluid moving through it, and it produces a precessional torque, which produces lift. A colleague of ours has already modeled this. How much can it produce? Well, conservatively, this would be about 15 tons for a 1 meter system, assuming, of course, that you had a flow rate of about 1 liter per second, up to 4 liters per second. Big flow rate, big effect. Let's move on. Potlatnikov. Evgeny Potlatnikov had an asymmetric magnetic field inside of his disk. This is how he thinks it works. I think it's working through a locally trapped potential, because what happens is that you have two different potentials, time forward, time reversed, in the system. This will produce the predicted result. I have the math model for this thing. I know how this thing works using these potentials. Also using internal phase conjugation with a trapped longitudinal wave circulating inside the disk. This is also related to the Biefeld-Brown effect because it has 10 million volts per meter potential. I know I'm going through this rather quickly, but I'll try to cover a lot of this. Okay, Koski-Frost. This is also getting into phase conjugation. You see this, this crystal levitating over here. Okay, this was originally thought to be, well, it was promoted to be a hoax. It actually is not. I actually found different sources of verification in Germany on this thing. This actually did take place. This is using a standing wave phenomenon inside of a quartz crystal that's piezoelectrically overloaded. Why did they do this to the quartz crystal? They wanted to make it a phase conjugate material. Again, this is validating many of the theories of Tom Bearden. This technology needs to be repeated. This is the actual Radio Umschau article. And you can see a photograph of the laboratory up in the upper right-hand corner. This is the crystal in the expanded quartz crystal. Essentially, how you've made this thing is you would run a current through the material. The material would reorganize in a different high energy state, different quantum state, keeping in mind that these are also resonance structures inside the crystal. So when that happens, the dielectric constant, the energy density of the material goes through the roof. This means that a very small energy input results in a big energy output. This includes any kind of gravitational or gravitostatic potential you put into it. Okay, so what are the inventors offering to the world? Unlimited free energy, anti-gravity, personal freedom from corporate control, time for growth and education. I mean, this is the problem that we have with our society right now. We're on a treadmill. We need to get off of this treadmill. And these energy devices is a way to do that. I mean, if we had more time to think on our own instead of, I mean, just this constant rush, we would be far more creative. This gives us a legacy for our children to be proud of as well. I mean, we want to give them a legacy for a clean world. We don't want another Fukushima. We don't want an environmental contamination, a planet with a destroyed atmosphere. What do the corporate governments offer? And this is corporate economic slavery, which is what we're beginning to see. Totalitarianism, George Orwell's 1984. Bleak future on a dead world and possibly extinction. How do we find the agenda? Research all references to treaties. Follow the money. Find real history for the motives. Listen to the whistleblowers. Remember all of the whistleblowers that are out there right now, including Snowden. They have something to say. We need to be our own whistleblowers as well. If we find out that what the corporations that are doing are counter to the well-being of the planet. How do we transition to a real civilization? Return control back to the people, uncorporatize the government, make all those running for public office qualify for office, create a body politic that integrates all beneficial technology into society. A real currency is needed. We can no longer have a fiat currency and something that's based on hot air. Okay, what are the forces blocking this? We have special interest groups, corporate government, corporations with a vested interest in old technology. That's what's blocking a big chunk of this. Banking interests threatened by a new technology, a new real economy. The people are also a factor in blocking this, and because they believe in authoritarian figures that they think are acting in their own self-interest. Not necessarily so. How do we implement free new energy? We have to reverse the brainwashing of the public, teach real science at the universities. We need to show that these energy systems are real, are needed, and we have to get rid of dirty energy technology out. So we also need to teach the real history. How did we get here? Dismantle the military security state, free up these 7,000 or plus patents, create an academy of invention to support creative thinking with implementation. We need to change the corporate charters. We need to create a lobby for free new energy, create a group for new energy in the UN with international political action, rather, have a Peace Corps for new energy. This is something that we would have inventors and engineers that would be going all over the world teaching this stuff. And thank you for attending, and this is close to the end of my presentation. Create a political action committee, do your research, build things on the bench. And if all else fails, buy my book. So that's it. So I'm open for Q&A now.
Okay,
Dan,
thank
did you
you,
want to be
Bill.
part of this?
Yeah, so I'm going to unmute Dan as well. And Dan, if you could show your face, your lovely face to us, that would be great. Okay, Dan, are you there?
Yeah, he's setting it up right now.
Okay.
I'm here. Can
All
you
right,
hear
I
me?
think there were some questions from Roger's group, so I'm going to unmute New York City and see what the questions are there. Roger?
Yes.
Hello.
My group is just. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just give us a second. So, guys, you have questions? You have to come up and just speak into the microphone. Speak loud. Yeah?
Hello, Bill. You were talking about the countries where is available to store this type of inventions like a free energy. So there are some countries that you suggest.
There are some countries that are more amenable to doing the energy technology, yes. Of course, there's a problem currently in the U.S. with a lot of energy research, but of course that doesn't mean that you can't do it on the rest of the planet. You know, so did that answer your question, or do you have something else?
Does that answer your question? No? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So
Thank you.
basically,
Oh, you're welcome.
Where except the US and So, guys, here's your chance. Al, you have questions?
No, that's it. I.
We got Al Road stepping up.
Al Road. Hey, hi Al. It's been a while.
Hey, Bill. Can you see me?
No,
You can't see me?
I can't see you.
Oh, well, I just want to say hello. It's been a long time.
Oh, hello, Al.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Kowski Frost. I think that's a real good area to get into now with all these materials science, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. It needs to be redone because now that there's a fairly good mathematical framework for redoing this, I think it's about time to do it. And of course, there are the notes that are available from Jerry as well, so which helps a
You have
lot.
them with you? You have all of those with you?
Oh yeah, yeah. I scanned them in before I left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you do any more work on the Electra?
Yeah, we're going to be doing some more work on the Electret, and we have the materials here to move forward with that one. We're looking for a good binder for it. Now, in the gel form, it forms a supercapacitor. I mean, we've had capacitors that are about like that big, that are 4,400 microfarads. Just unbelievably high in capacity. So The real challenge is to keep the domains from moving around once you polarize them, because if you put this thing in like a sodium silicate gel, then it's very temporary. So what we need to do is to find a more permanent way of doing this, and we have some silicate binders. I think Marcus Reed has a great idea on this one as far as making a permanent binder on this, which is another thing we're going to be working with. So the other, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to bring up the idea of noble gas engines.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't put that in there. That's the PAP engine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joseph Papp had something going there. And now the PAP engine is also a reversible system. In other words, it produces a reversible nuclear reaction the same way that Tesla's carbon rods in the Pierce Arrow had something. So yeah, that's another one that needs to be studied.
Well, our friend Guy is very much interested in pursuing that.
Great,
And
great.
I'll be seeing him on Monday, so I want to hook you guys back up. He's curious about what you're up to.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, I think that'd be a great idea.
Any other questions?
Anybody else? Otherwise, me and Bill will just catch up on old times here.
Yeah.
I want to come out, and what I want to say, I want to come out to France and visit you guys soon, okay? So,
Oh, great. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've got some projects that you can work on us with. That'd be good.
I'm ready. Okay, I'm giving up the throne here. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Good to hear from you, Al.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a quick question from Loretta from Connecticut. She's asking Bill if Nassim Haramein is a colleague.
Yeah, he's a colleague of ours. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I hope Loretta is pleased with the question, with her answer.
Hi, Bill. My name's Mark. I have a question. I saw earlier that you guys have been experimenting with some 3D printing, and
Oh yes. Oh yes.
I'm personally really excited about the potential for that and printing complex geometries. One question that I had was, have you experimented printing in different metals? And I was curious, the technology with printing metals by doing it, you know, microns at a time, if it changes the electromagnetic effect of the metal by printing it that way. I was curious if you had any experience with that or had done any research on it.
Yeah, we're probably going to be printing in metal. Essentially, what you do is you take a eutectic material with about the same melting point. For example, there's some solders that will melt at 230 degrees C, which is about the same as ABS. And if you did that, then yeah, you could print in metal. Now, as far as making a different electromagnetic structure for the material, what you would do is between the print head and the bed, you put another conductor on the bed and essentially put a high frequency train of pulses into the metal as it's printing. And if, for example, you're using an alloy with a high relaxation time or a long relaxation time, you set it up so that your pulse width is less time than the relaxation time of the material that you've got. If you do this, then you're polarizing the material without putting any current in. This is important because if you put any further current into the material, it's not going to set up. I mean, you're basically going at ohmic heating, and it's going to get messy. So yeah, it's possible to do that. And that's some of the things that we're going to be experimenting with. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. That's a good one.
So I think that's all the questions from here, Inga, from the New York end. Do you have any other questions lined up?
I don't have any other questions from the webinar attendants. So do you guys have any questions for Dan? Any final questions?
Yeah, we got one question here.
Okay, let's do a quick one.
Hi Dan, this is David from Prague. I would like to ask you, how can we apply all of this in architecture you have talked about?
Well, yes, we are trying to create a science of biologic architecture, and that curriculum has gone global. You can see people participating at goldenmean.info/architecture. We have a list of materials, for example. We give examples of living material for biologic architecture. For example, even just the difference between a high temperature and a low temperature baked clay brick, that the low temperature bricks actually have better dielectrics and breathe charge better. And now we're actually adding to that curriculum using the Sputnik from Karatkos GDV, where when you're done, you measure the capacitance of the building, and you can predict in advance which building is going to affect seed germination because it breathes charge better. So there's a very advanced curriculum for biological architecture, and even in Mexico City, Arturo's group is very active. We just sent him some charged rock powder to demonstrate the living cement concept, where you take that rock powder, which has been charged capacitively, you add it to the cement, and then if you avoid steel, rebar, etc., and use plastic or carbon rod or bamboo reinforcement bar in the concrete, you can produce a charge lensing effect in the cement. The total effect then is to create a building that actually propagates living charge, allows your ore to breathe, and actually affects growth. So it's bioactive field in the same way that biology uses living architecture. So this curriculum is evolving well, and there's a global network involved and very active. So feel free to get in touch online on that as well.
Dan, can you quickly turn your webcam on and show us your face before we end?
Now remember that it's almost 4 a.m. here, so I'm looking pretty.
Okay.
Looking very mellow there, Dan.
Yeah, well, it's a bit late, past my bedtime.
Well, it's actually past our bedtime here in New York, believe it too. So we're gonna, Inga, we'll say goodnight from New York.
Okay. All right. Goodbye, New York. And
Okay,
goodbye, Dan and Bill. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
It was really, really great.
We had fun. Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
nice
Bill.
to be with you.
It was great.
Okay.
We really enjoyed it. Lots
Stay in
of
touch, everybody.
Here tomorrow about it. Okay.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thank you, Inga. Thank you, Inga.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye. Good night.